So our showcase tonight is on AI agents. And Zara, you want to take us over and introduce yourself and kick us off?
Yeah, sounds great. I'll figure out how to present. But hi everyone, I'm Zara. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders at OverWatch Data. We are an AI-powered threat intelligence company, and I'm based out of South Boston. Let me see. Basic.
Green button on the bottom.
Yeah, let's see. I have some slides. All right, I think you can hopefully share this.
Yes, we can see it.
Beautiful. Okay. So yeah, today wanted to talk about how we're using agents, kind of a case study of where we use them, what we found so far. I was really excited to get your feedback, and so I asked Paul if I could talk to you all. I know you all are really deep into generative AI, so excited to get your thoughts on what we should do differently and what's next for us. But yeah, with that said, I guess a little bit more on my background. So we started Overwatch 2 years ago, and before that, I was working at Google. I started off on Google Assistant and some of the natural language understanding part of the team, and then I moved to Google's threat analysis group. And our team had the mission of tracking state-sponsored hacking, influence operations, and financially motivated crime. And so basically the motivation here is very clear, is seeing traditional tools. I was like, this is a solution that begs for AI. So 2 years ago, we jumped into how can we make threat intelligence more effective using AI. A bit on digital agents. So if I don't know if any of you are also science fiction nerds, but I think something about the agent and the planning part of like these, avatars, we either see them in Ready Player One, Westworld, I think is really kind of captivates the imagination. And you think about going from something that's like a chatbot that's question answer to something that's really intelligent and really mimics real life. I think that planning and that ability to take actions, make decisions, understand your environment, make multiple steps towards a goal and sort of mimic reason, that's where we feel is the next step. And it's something we're really excited about. And so it's something that, we've gone very quickly in the last few years, but you think about starting off with that motivation of like, what does this look like next when you move beyond question answer into things that solve also real problems for real people versus just being fun. What we see with today's LLMs and some of the problems we had, with last year's solution of this problem is that there's obviously some incredible strengths. So they processing information at scale, they're incredibly smart. We often think about them as like a really smart intern or someone who like kind of crammed for the test who can like answer everything correctly, but you also see that need for supervision. So we see them like, when I use them, and you guys I'm sure use them way more than I do, but I can use them like for things like writing blogs, writing small software scripts, describing images, and that works really well. But we also see the weaknesses where it's cost prohibitive at scale, whether even if we probably shouldn't send all of our data to OpenAI, but even if we wanted to, we can't pay for that. It tends to generalize outputs, like the base LLMs are trained to be generalists. And that means they can be hard to find, extract precise information. And we see a lot of it like very dependent on the knowledge of the prompter, meaning that like, a domain expert can get the result they want, but maybe a new person can't. And then also when you're trying to do this like complex reasoning, like when we started off, we were doing some supply chain intelligence stuff, and you'd be like, if you just ask an LLM to like, how important is this, like flight delay. There's like a flight delay from India to the US, and it's like it's very important because coal is transported through planes from India to the US, and that'll impact the coal supply chain. And some of those complex reasoning steps you see the base LLMs don't really get because they don't have the same kind of base understanding of our world that we do. Which made me think a lot as an ex-Googler about LLM versus human expertise. And I got this off of Google AI, so I didn't know no internal secrets here, but it reminds me of sort of the software engineering rubric at Google, where you start off as an intern and you're given a very small task with very little complexity and you just execute yourself. And then as you progress, you're given a more complex task with more ambiguity. And as you get further, your job is to break down a task into small subtasks that junior engineers can execute on. And the job becomes more and more about solving ambiguous problems and collaborating with other people. And I think that really is, kind of motivates this concept of agents as you start thinking about like, what if the AI can, break down the problem? What if it can collaborate with other agents? The third thing that we're thinking of is also the concept of learning by doing. And I think about this in like so many aspects of like both life and AI, which is like, it's like really hard to be perfect the first time, whether you're like fitting a curve or making a decision, like it's really hard to, or like even just imagine like taking a test online. It's like really hard to be perfect, but it's really easy to guess once, get it wrong, get the correct answer the next time. And so when you think about reinforcement learning or even just like agentic, use a tool and action, this is a concept that really helps kind of level up the performance of agentic systems. Right, a digression, and my image didn't stick here, but this is like a digression, but it's just something that we hear a lot online, is that there's a debate, and Andrew Ng's blog about this, about like talking about them as agents versus agentic workflows. The high level is just like, agent is the extreme, it's fully autonomous. Agentic is somewhere in between. But we talk about and we use agentic workflows as, it's agentic if it can kind of plan and execute from a single input to do multiple steps. We think about it as reasoning about the tools that it can use, selecting the best tool depending on the task. Can it collaborate with other agents or even humans? And that's where you see with like, these semi-agentic workflows might choose to respond quickly and ask you for the next step, perplexity some of this, instead of like making all the decisions itself. And we see them as like partially contained. And so we see them as different levels of agentic. And I'm sure someone else has a more formal definition of agentic. Okay, now getting into kind of how we use it, I'll talk a bit about how we use it and level back up into what we think this means more generally. Our problem. So I don't know how many of you work in cybersecurity or fraud. If any of you do, please raise your hand. I will probably pick your brain more later on. Oh, cool, wonderful, Steve, I see you. But we work on the intelligence problem, and so we see for a lot of our users are fraud and cyber intelligence teams. Their job is to monitor, disrupt, and prevent cyber and fraud threats, and we see them like generally flooded with alerts. So if you think about how many CVEs are reported every day, there's always a new vulnerability, there's always a new data breach, and even something like fraud tactics. Like when you think about threat actors discussing on these dark web or criminal Telegram communities, there is way more alerts than is possible to triage. The other thing we saw is that traditional tools, like the current vendors in the space, were built like 10 to 15 years ago on this concept of like MapReduce, keyword search, Boolean search workflows. And so the way they work is they surface these large amounts of alerts, and then teams will spend kind of like often might be staffed 24/7 to like look at the alert, triage it, research it, and try to do something with it. Which, as someone who likes AI, you're like, this is painful. That is not a job for humans to do that. So they should have a machine do that and spend their time on the interesting stuff. And this also does matter. So this is a stat from Ryan, who's in the audience. But like, this is the important thing is that like these CVEs are exploited often the day that they come out. And so there is like, if you can get the lead time, it actually matters. But people are bogged down in the kind of the sad triage workflow. So our take, we start off with we'll talk about levels of agents, but the base answer is, what if you can just ask a question? And so I don't know if this is big enough, but if you see on the right, here's a first example of this, which is, I don't know if you can see it, but it says, how do people use the term foals in the deep web communities? And you see the answer, it says the term foals is used to describe the comprehensive set of stolen personal information. It usually includes the full name, the address, the date of birth. And what this is sort of a basic question answer agent, but it's the same as Perplexity. It basically finds the right data sources to look at. It chooses the right keywords to search. It ranks what's more important and summarizes a report of findings. A next answer, another version of this, is getting a little bit more intelligence-y, is like, what's going on in ransomware? And similarly, the agent can go off and look at all the things in ransomware. You can see it can annotate them and extract different information and then write a summary of what's going on with the latest Lockbit thing. I think this is actually an old screenshot, so it doesn't cover today's Lockbit hit of the Federal Reserve or something. And then you might answer follow-up questions. So you see this basic question answer, you still are asking the follow-up question. So your next question might be, who is Lockbit Sup? And you don't see it in these results, but that's like a common question is asking about like, who is the attacker? What are they known for? What do they usually do? In this case, it's saying that Lockbit Sup is the Telegram alias for Dmitry Koroshev, who's a Russian national identified as the administrator and the developer behind the Lockbit ransomware group. And so that's sort of the basic question answer, but you still see we're still only performing a couple steps at a time. And so this is our basic version. We have one of our chatbots is chat with the dark web for people who like Perplexity. The next level is we think we, kind of we go those early steps of what is an agent, like we can ask it questions, what if we deploy them? So can they just go do this? So if you like ransomware, just have it monitor ransomware all the time, every day. And so you see this is our dashboard of sort of these deployed alerts of having it's just tracking the latest stuff in ransomware, it categorizes them, it can cluster them together and surface context on these reports. The next step is we think about the collaboration question. So the agents can work together. You might have a personalized agent that knows that it needs to go talk to other agents. And so the way we split this up is then you have specialists. So you think about a team of experts instead of one generalist. And you think about like you have its data collection agent. You have ones that are specialized in dark web data collection, and they can go off, do the persona farming, join the right communities, find the data, and return results. That might be a very different workflow from something that's more of an enrichment agent, things that can research information on attackers, the victims, things that are experts at extracting technical indicators. And then the last step might be like a reporting agent. So different users, some users might want to see a one-pager PDF on the results. Others might want an executive summary emailed to them every day. Others might want to see like the data integrated into their own workflow, so posted to their internal dashboard. And those are each of steps, but they kind of can be used together in a flexible way. Resulting in something that's like, it's very easy, it's very simple to use for users, where they can get a simple result and it gets translated into a complex and robust and kind of reliable pipeline. And what we like this for is it's become very highly personalized from every step of it, like the data, the context, the ranking, the output. It's very, it gives the feeling of unique to you. And to John's earlier point, it's like give you personalization without having, for us, like we don't have to collect all the data. We aren't like scraping user data. They don't actually give us any inputs. They just say like, tell me about ransomware targeting the financial sector. And that will be the end digression. I'll have more questions for you guys later on like what you suggest for us next. But sort of what we see in like our perspective on like why we went with this approach and like our learnings for other use cases. I think one thing is we can think about when, and I think when we use agents for us is like about when the decision requires multiple steps. We also think about it like when the results can be dramatically improved with planning. And so you think about that example of if it's a problem that's for a senior domain expert, they can just be like, oh yeah, you break it down into these 3 steps and then it's easy. That is a really good problem because it indicates that if you have these like choke points where you can say it's a series of like multiple choice questions, and a series of multiple choice questions is really good for something that's agentic, that can make some choices, see which one worked, and then kind of make subsequent decisions. Another idea, and we haven't done this as much, but the idea of exploration is like, if you don't even know what you want, you can sort of ask this and it will come up with some hypotheses, test them, and return some suggestions. So if you're like, like for like sort of vague questions that aren't underscoped. And the other thing that, we're really into is like the personalization element, is you can like tweak each sub agent by using, a team of them, and you can get like these very highly customized outputs that are very flexible. There's also the how. So the basic structure is you plan, you act, and maybe you iterate. You see typically agents have access to tools, mostly APIs they can call. They have access to memory. They might use it in different ways, either in the decision itself or maybe more in a reinforcement after the fact. And they also have this concept of planning. So a big part of it is, can they break down the problem into these sub-problems? How in a little bit more detail. I think I stole this from, I don't know, Ryan, I don't remember which paper I stole this from. But there's a few variations on how you break down the problem. One is like there's the typical like train of thought reasoning. You try to get get the prompt itself to break something into sub-problems. And that can be like, you see the single path where you go one at a time. There's also this idea of multiple paths. So try different approaches in parallel and aggregate or unaggregate at different steps. I personally like the second one better because as long as the APIs you're calling aren't that expensive, having multiple shots on the goal can be really useful. And I think so that sort of ends like the kind of a high level how we're thinking about it. We can go into some different directions later, but I think at a high level, our takeaways is that they solve some of the complexity of the problems that we found were difficult last year with traditional LLMs. They turn generalists into specialists. And so when you do that, you can combine them into teams that really improve the trustworthiness and scale of results. I think it's something that, we hear this question a lot as we talk with enterprise clients is the trustworthiness factor is really important. And there's things you can do about explainability, interpretability. But also I think there's an element of, for us internally and externally, like as we use these different characters, you learn the strengths and weaknesses of each model. And so like any other human team, if you combine the strengths of one thing with, to balance out the weaknesses of others, we find it can be like a more robust solution versus just trying to train one really, really smart, super gigantic model generalist. And then in our domain, another thing that we think about, and I have one slide later if you want us to go more into this digression, is the idea of like, we see this used as fast as we are as at a startup, who's way faster is like the criminals are always faster at adopting. They're always more lean and faster to market. And so we see this as going to be used, and people already use it for things like phishing, fraud, social engineering. And so we do have a feeling we see this happening. We also like, see the concept of like if the criminals are doing it, like you have to, we feel strongly there is about like you have to fight fire with fire to keep pace and scale defense with offense. And we also see that this outcome, we think it's significantly better and game changing. Like we talk about that triage problem, we hear from our case studies that our users are able to catch way more with like 10 to 100x less effort. They can catch 25% more than they were seeing before, just because they used to get a queue of like 40,000 things, and the important one was like 3,998. And so we think this is like a much, can improve our use case, but also a lot of other use cases is like, it provides some of the like just like raw brain power of the LLMs with some of the more structured and controllable and scalable outputs. And that's kind of it. I've repeated some of this, but yeah, that's high level thoughts. Thank you so much. I have some appendix slides if we want to go into crime LLMs, some other screenshots, or I can share some of the sources for the diagrams we used.
So fantastic, Zora. Thank you so much. I think I've got a lot of questions, but who's got some questions? Raise your hand and all digesting this. How do you how fast do you see this rolling out enterprises from the enterprise you're talking to, Zora? Do you think they're going to be very slow and cautious because of the governance type issues and security concerns, and it's really going to be the criminals are going to be the fast early adopters, or do you see?
It's an interesting question, and I feel like because we're an enterprise tech company, the biggest thing is just standard procurement. Nothing to do with even a regular AI, just like the standard budgeting cycle can be slow. But I think we do hear some concerns. I think one is the data privacy. So I think that is a standard concern of one question we often get is like there's all the security questions about what we do with the data. Are we training? But then there's also the question of like, are we sending it to a third party LLM? That's another type of question. And so we sort of see a mix there. But yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your question.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
Yes. First off, fantastic. Yes. My question was, excuse me. Do you find that most of the value that you're creating is doing simple, basically plugging holes in simple stuff that people haven't, taken care of, like a lot of, I know a lot of the threat analysis stuff that I've read about, and I'm certainly not an expert. I couldn't even play one on TV, but, it had to do with things like, folks waiting for updates and software releases with known bugs, and then people not updating their environments fast enough and so forth. And I could see lots of agentic value there because it's kind of bureaucratic complexity, right? So how much of it is kind of adding value there, which could be tremendous, versus really going at the super sophisticated folks who are doing very, very clever new stuff? Is it like put another way, the worst thing, the fastest way you can crash a McDonald's is not cleaning the bathroom, right? I mean, it's kind of a thing. So where is the value?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because previously, like I was completely working on the more sophisticated stuff, and that was like Google, like the nation state stuff. But I mean, where we work now is exactly what you said. It's like the crash to McDonald's. I think we see like the biggest threats are things like phishing or social engineering, which for most companies is a problem because banks can't necessarily force their users to use two-factor, and you see like a lot of like scams targeting elderly communities who may not be aware of like the latest cyber best practices. So we see a lot of value, for our tools of like plugging those basic holes, providing leading indicators on something like fraud, where the new scam of the day is changing very quickly. But I think there is a more fun, like, as you get further on, there is an interesting tail end of things like, agents that can red team your systems, things that are getting into that more sophisticated space.
That's great.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go JC next. Before we do that, we have Alex Valino in the house. Alex, are you calling from Europe?
Yeah, I do.
What time
I'm
is
in
it?
Scotland.
What time is it?
It's almost 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. So we've got Europe, US, and Australia. Oh, how exciting. So Glenn, good to see you, and glad you can join. Go ahead, JC.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And thanks, Zara. It was a great presentation. I help organizations with adoption of generative AI in healthcare specifically. And one of the sort of big roadblocks that we face in healthcare is essentially the accuracy of the results that come back from the models. And you made a point a little bit during the presentation about ways to make the information come back more accurate. And I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit more in terms of deploying an agentic strategy to make results of sort of any generative AI application come back and be more accurate. How to guarantee accuracy with an agentic strategy is sort of what I'm interested in hearing, if you have some examples.
Yeah, happy to talk about it. And yeah, we'll be more candid and hope that none of you are building a competitive threat intelligence company. But I think it's an interesting question because I think we started off with this idea of explainability, and then you very quickly get into the academic under definition of explainability is explainability before you make the decision versus the interpretability, which is like sort of like the after the fact correlated stuff. We as practical people love the second, and so I think we have a few prong approaches to this. One, wherever we can, we always try to cite the source. And so I didn't show that much dashboard screenshots, but if we give an executive summary, every place you can, try to be like, this is the source we got from, with the idea is, some of that idea of like, I think John said, like, we're really trying to like make workflows more effective or more efficient versus trying to make the decision ourselves, which we think can kind of reduce some of that risk. So like, if we say like, we think the answer is in this article and this is why, it gets them to the answer faster, but they also like, gives that human a chance to second check before they like, shut down, ban accounts or something like that. I think there's also a few layers. So one thing we found is like also that question of, can you scope the problems to be specific enough or abstract and like kind of like, something like categorization. So if we can categorize the results and tell you this is a cyber incident versus, a photo of a cat. That is like another thing where it's like a bit interpretable. You can see why we're surfacing to you. We can see that you said you like cyber incidents that are impacting healthcare. But it kind of gets you a little bit towards like steps of debuggability. And then the last thing, yeah, I keep on getting sidetracked, but the last thing is that like breaking down the problem into something that's not open-ended. We ran into this at Google Assistant a lot, and I don't know if anyone else is a user, but as an early user, you get very frustrated where you're like, I really only want to do two things. I want to know the weather. I want to know like play music. And it keeps on answering random things about like home automation. And I don't want those verticals. And I think that's a classic example of it's doing so many things and it's not really good enough to do that always. Now it probably is. But that's something that we try to deploy a lot is like, if you're in a domain and there's only like 3 to 4 right answers, like just pick among those answers.
Thank you, Sarah.
Go ahead, Lucinda, and then we'll go to David. Go ahead, Lucinda.
Yeah, I got two questions. One of them is a short question. Like, what frameworks are you using to orchestrate the agents? Are you using DSPy, LangGraph, just build your own Python, just build your own structures, etc.? So that's question one.
Yeah, I might actually rope in Ryan to answer for his project as well. We've like tried a couple. I started off with like LangChain and then very quickly got frustrated with like some flexibility things. And so we ended up rolling our own Python for the initial thing, although I think we will regret it at some point. So I think Ryan is looking at some more like framework approaches.
Yeah, for DSPy is supposed to be good. And the other one is like, how do you validate the outcomes of your agentic workflows? Like, how do you like? He was asking about accuracy. My question is, how do you measure accuracy? Like, how do you measure what's a good outcome and what's close to a good outcome, etc.?
Yeah, with pain and suffering, I guess.
Yeah, with a lot of like pairs of like examples and reference answers and stuff, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So I think for us, like it also because we sort of scope, it's basically like a decision tree of sorts, and so you can scope and test around each boundary, which I think helps a lot. We also do things like, we sourced our agents came from customer interviews. We're like, what questions do you want to know the answer to? And then we like say like, great, we'll make things that answer those questions. And I think also another approach is synthetic data generation, and so stealing from one of my old advisors' ideas, but in the text space, like if you have a hero query, you can ask GPT for make variants of your hero query and test them out. But I think it is complicated, and especially complicated for the update part of it is like, we're trying to figure out how do you like make the more robust integration test and monitoring, because it's like very easy to end up in that use case where you're like, oh, it's better, but that ends up being better on this use case and not better on this other use case.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so honestly, it's just like stuff we're working through.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, David, then Tim. Go ahead, David.
I am helping my sales and marketing minded clients build AI agents that represent them out in the world. So I'm having a hard time convincing them not to be full of crap because they're marketing people. So I try to fight them not to have a scrubbed and polished marketing and PR spin to their representation in their AI agent, meeting other people who may also be positioning aspirationally instead of accurately. Do you find that? Is anyone finding that? Is that something that I'm bumping into because I'm the kinds of companies I'm working with, or is that something that you can kind of get over after people mature into not making it just a marketing kind of game?
Yeah, it's super because I think there's Andrew Ng did the like rant about like stop calling them agents. Like if I hear people talking about agents, you're like haven't ever done them, like people, and I think that could be a little bit gatekeeping, but I think it definitely is very true in this space where I think everyone wants to quickly go to like fully autonomous red team agent that can find 0 days in other governments infrastructure, and you're like, well, maybe this is a little bit of a reach when agent GPT sort of barely works. But I think it's we definitely run into that. I also think it kind of depends on the person you're talking to, because I think at some levels of the organization, like especially the more senior levels, like people get really excited about the vision and they really want to like they want to hear like, tell us why using your tiny startup will be like way better in a year. Versus like when we work with like a cyber analyst, they're much more like, they're like, let me try it today. Like just give me the chatbot. I want to see how it works. And so I think it's something that we kind of, we kind of see different levels of that.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Go ahead, Tim, then RJ.
Yeah, did you build your own foundation model for this?
No, I wish. That'd be very fun. We do fine tuning, and that's kind of the space. And we do a lot of like orchestrating models together. I think that's one where like in various levels we do like a lot of we often differentiate on the data they have access to. That's where we think we have a unique space, and especially in some of the creepy crawly communities, that's something that we feel like people like Perplexity wouldn't have access to. And then so fine tuning and then finding the right model at the right time is sort of our specialization.
Okay. Do you use mostly open source models then, or anything in particular that you found better for this activity?
Yeah, we've tried a bunch of them. I mean, honestly, like to John's point earlier, we have different flavors. So we can run more privacy preserving and worse outcomes, or we can run less privacy preserving and more accurate outcomes. I think one thing that's interesting is things like Google and Claude can tend to be a little bit more worried about like safety. And so for our use case, when we're often like talking about like analyze this weird dark web or 4chan text, that can cause issues. So we love the context windows of things like Gemini and Claude, and we often go back and forth with them. But because of that reason, if we're doing a purely like API-based LLM, we often like GPT, Llama, Mixtral, like Quen, Grok. Grok is so fast. So those are some of the like our favorites in terms of like more of the open source models. We started with Llama, now we're playing more with Mixtral because of its.
Which Grok, just for the uninitiated? Because I think there are two of them, aren't there? Is it the Grok from Elon Musk or the other Grok?
Oh, yeah.
The other Grok.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify because, okay.
Somebody needs to rename because that's definitely confusing. Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Tim. Any other questions? Or is that it, Tim?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. It's really interesting.
Thanks, Tim. We'll do one more RJ and then we'll go to open mic. Go ahead, RJ.
Okay, great presentation. Just wondering, I hope you didn't cover this and I missed it, but how do you deal with things changing so quickly, like in the security world and, language models? You think of something that takes a long time to train, and it's pretty much information knowledge that's set in stone almost. Fine tuning, okay, you can tweak it, but you may actually start changing things in the wrong ways. But how do you deal with, keeping your model up to the date with the latest things to be concerned about in your business?
Ryan said, I think rag, but I think that's it's funny because when I started, we started in like say summer of 2022, so right before ChatGPT launched, but GPT-3 had already launched. And our initial concept, I was like, we're going to train all these giant models that do like ranking and all this cool stuff. And then I very, very quickly realized, I was like, if the models I'm training are garbage, I got to get rid of them and just be able to move really fast. And so I think that's something that to the retrieval augmented generation, it feels like it's so powerful, and like there's so many use cases where you think you have to fine tune, you can just like shove data into the prompt smartly. And so that is really been really useful for us. There's also like a lot of proxy things, like we have our own like proxy layer, but there's things like light LLM that make it, or Bento ML that make it really interoperable, so you can just kind of trade them out. And I think that's something that we really optimize for, is like the ability to trade out, because we know that like whatever wall we're hitting up against today, we know there's going to be a model out in like 2 weeks or a month that will solve that problem. So we just want to be like designed so that we can shove it in at the right place.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, RJ. Go ahead, Troy, real quick, and then we'll start moving to open mic.
Just real quickly, then, just to carry on your thought there. So what you're really focused on in terms of product is flexibility. You have a layer of abstraction because you don't know what model is going to be better next. And so I don't know if that was a question, maybe a yes.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely we focused. We kind of like learned early on, or like we got kind of hit by that. We're like, oh, this new model is way better. We need to be able to move quickly. So it's definitely something that's pretty ingrained. And I think that's kind of the, for us as a, small early stage startup, like the interoperability is really important, of just being well positioned to take advantage of the latest Hugging Face launch and doing it, like a year before the competitors will.
So, Zara, two quick questions for open mic for me. I'm assuming that millions are being spent by our Defense Department in Russia to hack into other defense. Would you agree with that? I would assume that's got to be the high end of this investment sphere right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. Oh yeah,
I mean, why is not investing $50 million or $100 million? I'm just shocked.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure, but 100%. Like it's the obviously the nation states targeting nation states, that's like huge dollars put into that. But then even some of the cybercrime groups, and again, right now we're focusing on some of the smaller groups, but one of the most sad part last fall, as I was working hard on my startup late at night, and we look and we're monitoring this info stealer. I think it was called like Bunny Loader or something like that. And you look at the number of payments that this guy is getting, and you're like, this guy makes like 10x more than I do. And you're like, even these like kind of like small, like, and it's not a very sophisticated malware. It's very easy to reverse engineer. And you're like, what are we doing? These guys are just breaking it in.
Well, hopefully they'll come knocking. Go ahead, Mike. We'll move to open mic at our questions. So go ahead, Mike.
This is open. This is an open mic question.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Or Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Well, one thing I just wanted, just as an observation, it's been a little over a month since I took the ChatGPT for the salesperson, the busy sales executive.
Yeah.
It has changed the way I do sales. People who want to change the way to do sales definitely take this class. Every sales situation that I get into, I put it in the ChatGPT. Sometimes it's the way that I thought it was going to be, and sometimes it gives me great new ideas. And I've been selling for years, and it gives me great new ideas that I didn't think of. That it, suggestions that I use and that are successful. So anyone out there who, I've done it, I've been trying it for over a month now, and it definitely works and will improve your bottom line.
Well, thank you. That's unsolicited advocate for our
unsolicited advocate. Yeah,
thank you.
It was wonderful. The other thing is, I'm still paying $20 for ChatGPT. Is there any reason I'm doing that?
It's a good question. It's come up a lot. Instead of just using the 4.0, the free version now.
Yeah. Is there any, like, I feel like I want to be like a priority customer, but is there any reason that I should really be spending $20 a month on it? Anybody? No
Yeah,
one can give me an answer on that.
yeah. I mean, we just in terms of time, let's put your answers in the chat on that. And then we'll go to Steve, and then we'll wrap up here. Go, Steve, and then Troy.
So two quick questions.
Actually, before we go, Steve, Mike, on that, just so you know, Mike Davis, who's on the call, he and I have a sales training for 50 salespeople tomorrow on GenAI.
Oh, great.
Really excited about that, but it's really
Good. It's changed the way I do business. It's wonderful.
transformative. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
it's
ahead,
transformative.
Troy. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry, Steve.
So two quick questions. So Zara, where is your company being presented? Are you going to the big trade shows, the Black Hats and the RSAs? Where can we see demos? That's question one. Question two is, can you use the intelligence either at your company or other companies to track down black market crypto transactions? And is that being done?
Yeah, we're not going to any of the. Actually, it might be at DEF CON, mostly for fun. But we haven't been doing the big conferences. We've been doing some like the smaller ones, things like SleuthCon, CyberWarCon, this type of thing. But we do have. I'll try to put this in the chat. We do have a free version of our cyber tool. If you're not on cyber, we can also talk about other things. But we have a bit.ly if people want to try out the free cyber tool, and you can get at the chatbot. It's or some of the chatbots there if you want. The dark market crypto stuff, it's interesting. You know, I think our natural partner, we talked with Chainalysis a bit because they do the actual transaction tracing. We do stuff in that space, and so we get into a bit of like things like ransomware, tracking actors across that stuff. It's a little bit newer for us, so we're just starting out there. But it's definitely it's honestly like that specific project is like a passion project of mine. Is like it's you can literally like track the traction for a ransomware group by looking at how much money is coming into their wallets.